Hello everybody, welcome to a new episode of Chess Endgame Basics, and today I would like to share with you a really important concept in pawn endgames, which is called opposition, and we'll see in just a moment what I mean by that. I've prepared a couple of examples. Let me switch again. Here we are, and this is some really elementary stuff, but it's quite important to understand the concepts, because if it comes down to that, you want to know how you win with king and pawn against the other king. So quite important stuff here. Alright, so in this position white has only one winning move, and it is maybe counterintuitive, but white is not pushing the pawn but places the king on e5. Because I assume most of you are familiar, if you just push the pawn here, black can easily defend, and the important point here is always place the king on e8 in front of the pawn, so that after king d6, now black reaches the opposition. And this is the concept I would like to talk about. Opposition is called when the two kings face each other like that, and the one side who gains the opposition is the side who just moved into it. So here black is having the opposition because white has to move and has to give up the opposition. Okay, and well, if he moves the king back, doesn't gain anything, and if he gives a check, then now black moves the king back to e8, and now you can see it's a stalemate and a draw. So let's go back, and at this point white can achieve the opposition by playing the king to e5. And now black has to move its king, obviously, and this allows white to get by the king and push forward the pawn, which is supported by the king. Let's see how this works out. King f7 and now king d6. If now the black king comes forward, of course e5 check, the king can be pushed, and now king d7, and there's absolutely nothing black can do against the next move, e6, e7, e8. And you can see how important it is that the white king is now controlling the square e8. So black can try king e8, now king e6. And this is another important thing. If the king reaches one of these three squares and the pawn is still behind the king, it is always winning for white. And it doesn't matter if black is having the opposition in this case or not. So, and these squares where white is always winning are called the key squares. They're pretty much the same for all the pawns except for the pawns on the edge of the board. So not for pawns on the A file and the H file, and I will come to that later. So if the king reaches any of these three squares, d6, e6 or f6, white is always winning, and we'll see this in just a moment. King f8. Now, of course, white could also play king d7, and we would reach the same position we just saw. But just to illustrate for you, black reaches the opposition here, but he is still lost, and I'll show you why. So if it wasn't white's move now, then we would just have the same thing we already saw. It's really straightforward. But let's say it is white's move, and it is actually. So king d6. Now black is keeping the opposition, but now white can also keep the opposition by just pushing the pawn, and now black has to give it up, go to the side, now e7, and now it's not stalemate. Black has to play the king here, king d7, white is promoting in the next move. Alright, so let's go to the next example and see how this turns out. And there's another concept. So there's close opposition, which we just saw, and there's also distant opposition, which I would like to show you right now. This position is winning for white, but there's also only one winning move. And if you would like to, you can stop the video and try to find out yourself right now what you would play. So I'm going to show it now. e5 again, pushing a pawn doesn't help. We would just end up in a similar position we just saw. The question is, should the king go to f4 or d4? And only king f4 wins. The point is, after king d4, now black can reach a distant opposition with king d8. This time 3 squares are between each other, but wherever the white king now moves forward, then black can reach the close opposition. Let's say king e5, king e7. And now there's no way for the white king to bypass the black king. King f5, king f7. The black king is just keeping an eye on the white king and not allowing the king to move past, to move by. Same is true in this position if king d5, king d7. There's nothing white can do, and this is called the distant opposition. And actually in this case, it is the only drawing move for black to play king d8, because if he plays king d7, then again, white is reaching the opposition. King d5, king e7, king e5, and this is already familiar to you. And now after king d7, white can move by, can play king f6. However, in this position, if king f4, king d8, now white doesn't have to move the king to e5, but he can move the king to f5. And the point is that now black can reach kind of the diagonal opposition, which is also sometimes important, but in this case, of course, the king just goes to f6, and we have reached one of the 3 winning key squares again for white, and white is winning. And this position is already familiar to you, and you know how white wins. And the same thing is true after king f5, king e7, king e5. We have seen this already a couple times in this video. So let's go to the next example. Okay, here black is also having the distant opposition, but still he is lost, and we'll see why in just a moment. It would not be good now to just move the pawn forward 1 square and saying, okay, now I have the distant opposition myself, because black can play king e7, and now you cannot keep the opposition by playing king e3, because obviously the square is occupied by the pawn. And if you move the king forward, then king e6, and it's a draw. So we have to do it the other way around, king e4 first. And the point is that after king e6, now black is having the opposition, but white is having a waiting move, e3. And this is what I want to show you, that the farther you're in front of your pawn, the better actually, because you always have this waiting move. And now it is the same thing again. King e5, king f7, king d6, and we have reached one of the key squares, and e4, and white wins. And same is true for king d6, then of course king f5 again, king d5, e4 check, king d6, king f6, king d7, and now king f7 wouldn't help really, it wouldn't hurt either, but after king d6, white has to move back. But here just e5, and now king e6. Not e6 though. King e6 again. e6 would be a draw. But king e6, and now this is already quite familiar to you. Alright, so let's go to the next example. This will be a quick one. I just want to point out one thing you need to know about g pawns and b pawns. If you reach this opposition, you're winning, but you have to be a little bit accurate. Both moves win, king f6 and king h6, but king f6 makes the matter a little bit more complicated. I will show you why. Because after king f6, black can play king h7, and now there's a trick. You cannot play g6 because it's a draw. And the point is that after g6, black plays king h8, and now usually we would like in this position to play king f7 and then push the pawn, but you can see it's a stalemate, so it doesn't work. And after g7 check, it's a stalemate too, so it's a draw. So after king h7, actually king f7 is necessary, king h8, and now we come back to the position to original position, and now only king h6 works. And well, now king h8, g6, king g8, g7, and we know how this is going to end. White queens and wins. Alright, so for the last example, I just want to share with you real quick the key squares of the pawns on the edge of the board. In this case, the a pawn. Here are the key squares b7 and b8. So you want to make sure to place your king on either of these squares in order to block the black king to get to your pawn. So now king b7, and now you can see there's absolutely nothing black can do to stop the pawn. We'll just go forward and queen. And the point is that here, here a5 doesn't win because now black gets in front of the pawn. Oh well, maybe not necessarily, but if king a7, now you're missing a file on the left to put your king there, and the king is now stuck on the edge of the board, and you can see black is just not allowing the king out, and king b6 also doesn't help because here it's a draw too. And here you can push your pawn to a7, but now you don't have any moves left, and it's actually black who's stalemating white in this case. So just to remember, the key squares are on b8 and b7 for the a pawn, and of course for the h pawn it's g8 and g7. Alright, I hope I could illustrate for you the important, really elementary concepts of, for one, opposition and key squares, and what you need to know when you're just left with one pawn. Even this can be, as you saw, not too easy, and there's some important things to remember. Always aim to get your king in opposition and put your opponent in Zugzwang, or force your opponent to give up opposition. Alright, I hope this helped you, and if you liked my video, then I would be happy if you subscribe to my channel above there. Just click on the icon and you can click subscribe, and you won't miss any of my upcoming videos. Alright, see you next time. Bye.